Welcome to Love Light, the only podcast dedicated to bright, fine art photography. Hosted by Sarah Jane Ethan, Love Light is here to celebrate all things bright, pretty and pastel. At Love Light, white is the new black and beauty is in the detail. This is your place to relax, a place to belong, a place to be inspired and connect with like-minded colleagues who share your passion for light and beauty. So come and introduce yourself in the Love Light Facebook group and subscribe to the Love Light YouTube, podcast and Instagram for your weekly dose of inspiration and connect with bright, fine art photographers from around the world.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Love Light podcast. Today I'm very excited because we've got Melissa Jill with us. Melissa Jill lives in Huntsville, Alabama with her husband Bruce and their one-year-old son Bo. But they used to live in Phoenix, Arizona, where she photographed weddings for 16 years. But she's currently in the process of retiring, which is going to be a fascinating discussion. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have Melissa on the podcast, because we often talk about starting a business, but often don't talk about how do you know when it's the right time to end and what does that look like and how do you navigate changing into something else? She is a serial entrepreneur and has started 3 businesses and 5 streams of income. She's had 6 associate photographers in the past, a photo booth company, an education platform, and an album design business, all going at the same time. But after becoming a mum, she's decided to scale back and focus solely on the Align album design, which is her album design company. So I'm really excited to have you here, Melissa. You've got such a fascinating story and such a wealth of experience. So I'm really excited to hear your story. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Sarah Jane. I appreciate it. And I'm just absolutely charmed by your accent.
Yeah, thank you. I think so somebody said to me the other day, said, "Oh, you're such a good interviewer." And I think it's the British accent that helps.
Yes. I could just sit here and listen to you all day and pretend like I'm in the middle of a movie or something.
Oh, amazing. Notting Hill or something like that.
Yes, I love that movie.
I actually live in the north of England now, in Newcastle, which is the furthest city north before you get to Scotland. But I'm originally from the south, as far south as you can get without being in the sea. And so to the people where I live now, I sound incredibly posh. I've got such a southern accent.
You sound incredibly posh to me as well, but I don't know if that's negative connotation for you, but it's positive for me. So.
Oh, well, I mean, if it's the Queen's English, can you go wrong? Amazing. But Melissa, you've got such a fascinating story and I'm so interested to know, this transition that you're going through to retiring and setting up it's an associated business, but still away from photography in itself. And so tell us a little bit about how you got started in photography. You've been going for a long time. You've got a lot of experience. So I'm really interested to know how it all kicked off for you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I took photography classes in high school and college, but just thought of art as a hobby. I didn't have any artists in my family, so I didn't really pursue it as a career until after college. And in 2003, back in the dinosaur ages, I had a photographer friend in California who had started his photography business, and that kind of gave me the idea that maybe I could make money at this. And this was back in the day when there were no website templates.
Wow.
I built my first website in Flash. I learned Flash. I had to convince my clients that digital was just as good as film.
Wow, interesting.
I mean, there was a day that was happening. And so the industry looked very different then, but I, didn't know what I was doing, had never taken a business class in my life, but just kind of dove in, started taking workshops and quickly realized that I loved the business side of things just as equally as the photography. And that was a huge blessing for me because that turned out to be, a huge chunk of what I had to do over the course of my career and focus on. And so it's been a wild ride and never did I have, a business plan, but I just kind of did the next step, the next thing that I felt, that God was leading me to do. And it's been a really fun journey.
I love that. I really like that. You just said you just did the next thing to do. And I think actually we can do that a lot as humans. We can look so far in the future and just think, I want to get there. And then you either get overwhelmed with all of the things that you think you have to do to get there, or you just get stuck, just paralyzed. You're like, oh, I don't even know what to do first. And I love that's an incredibly practical and I think a very peaceful way to approach building a business. What is the next practical step in front of you that you have the capacity to do do that.
Absolutely.
I love
Absolutely.
that
And
message.
and for me, it just came from not really knowing. Like if I had to sit down and make a business plan, I wouldn't even know how to dream of what my life
Wow.
could look like in 5, 10 years.
Wow.
Like I didn't know what I didn't know. And,
No.
you know, it turned out that my journey was so much better than anything that I could have planned. I couldn't have thought as big as what it ended up being.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, for me, it's just about doing the next thing and seeing what
Yeah.
comes of it.
That's so interesting. So practically, what did that look like for you? Like, what were the kind of stages of your business growing? You obviously had a very long career. Were there kind of marker points for you where you kind of felt like, okay, I'm transitioning to the next bit now, or
Yeah.
moments that stick in your mind?
Yeah, it's interesting. Looking back over my journey, I think every 2 years I started something new. And it
Oh,
wasn't like I set out to do that, but it
yeah.
just kind of organically happened that way. And so I was able to go full time in 2004, which, the economy was doing well then.
Mhm.
And I was quickly able to go full time. And then 2006, I started teaching workshops.
Mm,
And this wasn't something I set out to do, but I had started blogging just to
mm.
share my information with photographers who were, asking me a lot of questions, and I wanted to be
Interesting.
helpful, but
Mm.
I didn't want to spend all of my time emailing people. So I
Yeah.
started putting all the information on a blog, which led to people asking me to do workshops. And then I started hosting, 2 or 3 workshops a year for about 6 years. And 2 years after that, I believe, is when I started my associate program.
Mhm.
And then I started Align Album Design in 2012. And it's just kind of been everything was just things that happened very organically.
Mm.
The associate program, I started getting a bunch of leads from clients who said, I love your work, but I can't afford you. Who would you recommend?
Mm.
And I was referring those out, which I was happy to do. But I also had a lot of photographers in my life who loved the photography side of it, but didn't
Yeah.
love the business side. And they were struggling. And so it just seemed like the perfect marriage of getting
Yeah.
these photographers, work, and also being able to take advantage of the leads that I had
Yeah.
built through my brand.
Because you'd worked for them. You'd worked for
Yeah,
them. Yeah.
absolutely. And so I just kind of figured it out as I went. And the album design company, I started sharing my album designs and then selling my templates. And photographers started asking me, would you do the design for me? And I was like, I don't really have time for that. But I had a friend of mine that was like a single mom of 4. And
Wow,
as
that's
I
a
was
challenge.
thinking about it, I felt like maybe she could do the design work, and it could be a
Ah,
blessing to her. And
yeah.
I could start a website, and I've got like the audience that I could sell to and market to and help, and then she could do the work. And it started out like most things do for me, thinking, oh, this will be easy, it'll just be a little thing I'll do. But it turns out
Yeah.
to be this huge, undertaking. And
Oh,
once you get
wow.
into it,
It's rarely as simple as it seems when you first say, how is it doing anything?
yeah. So Align Album Design is the company that I'm focusing on now
Yes.
that I'm retiring. And it's quite the undertaking, but I'm so
Yeah.
thankful, that the Lord had me start that back in 2012, because it has been, it turns out to be the direction that he's
Yeah.
taken me in now that I'm retiring. So
That's so interesting. And I want to talk a bit more later about the Align album design that you do, and how you work and why you love it, and all of these things. But talk us through more of your journey in photography, because you had 16 years of experience photographing weddings, which is, I think that's possibly the longest serving career that I've had on the podcast. So you had a lot of experience. What were some of the challenges that you experienced along the way, highs or lows, or moments that stand out to you in your mind?
yeah, great question. I mean, I think probably for a good 2, 3 years, I did not like my photography at all. So it was
Wow.
quite the learning curve to try and figure out how to accomplish the style that I wanted. And even after I got to that point where I was somewhat happy, I went through seasons where I would look at my work and be like, oh, it's okay, but it could be better, and I was always my worst critic. I think my clients were happy, but I was critical, and I think that's very common with artists.
Oh, so
we want to be better than we are. And it was actually 10 years in that I had kind of a crisis where, I guess I would be perceived as being very successful from the outside, but I was struggling with bookings. I was at a higher price point. Again, I was just kind of worn out and burnt out on a couple really difficult clients. And then I was looking at like these photos that I loved, and I couldn't accomplish what I was wanting. And what I finally realized is they're shooting film and they're shooting on a Contax 645. Right. And I decided to just take a leap and jump into film after shooting weddings for 10 years on digital. Wow. And that summer I, bought 2 Contax 645s. I rebranded.
Wow.
And I took a film photography workshop, and I just kind of jumped right in, and it gave me just new life. And it was something that I really needed to do in order to be able to enjoy being a photographer for another 5-6 years, it turns out, it was something that I needed to make it enjoyable and not just a job that I had to do, and so it really breathed new life into my work, my enjoyment of my job, and, took me in a new direction. And so 2014 was actually, one of my hardest years in business. I invested a lot of money into, rebranding, new website, new gear, just to kind of restart, and it turned out to be a really, really good thing for me.
Wow, that's amazing. And so what did that rebrand look like? I mean, it kind of makes me laugh because it's quite ironic that you started your business trying to persuade clients that digital was better than film. And then 10 years later, you're trying to persuade people to actually film is better. You want to hire film. So
it's very ironic.
That's so much fun. And so that rebrand, what did that look like for you? What was your photography brand before, and how did you need to modify that to now appeal to a clientele who would prefer film?
Yeah, I had started out like with this red and black brand with like this logo that I had created. And, it's funny how you love something, but then like 10 years later, you're looking at it and it's like, oh, how did I get to this point? Like, I hate this, you just don't feel like it represents you or what you want to be about or the type of client that you want to attract. So I think we're just changing people, we change, and we need to be able to allow our brand to change with us.
So good.
And so refreshing was what I needed. And I worked with a professional designer, Promise Tangeman with Go Live, and just did a completely, custom site and new brand that would fit like the film imagery and the color tones that I wanted to accomplish with film. And so it took a lot of energy, honestly, to decide to rebrand at that point, because you have so much collateral with your business cards and your website and just everything that your brand is on, and to need to redo all of that takes a lot of energy, but
totally.
But it was definitely worth it. So
and something that I've noticed, any change that I make to my business, I find that there's a natural lull afterwards. And I don't really know if there's a scientific explanation for it, but it's just something that I've noticed time and time again, that there's a bit of a lull when I make a big change and then suddenly things pick back up again. Did you experience that yourself, that you made this big rebrand and actually there was a moment where you're like, is this going to work? Have I made the right decision? Is this?
Absolutely. And honestly, like, even then I knew this may not be the smartest business decision, like it's going to cost me more money to shoot weddings now with the film and the processing. My market in Phoenix isn't necessarily clamoring for film photographers. You know, there is like still some educating that needs to be done, finding that right client. And so it wasn't something that I did primarily for business purposes. But like I said, I did it personally to be able to enjoy what I was doing and to love my work.
Yes.
And so for me, that was like the overriding thing that was more important. And I just hoped in faith that the business would thrive because I was, you know, doing what I needed to do for my own heart and soul, you know.
I love that. That's such a refreshing way to look at it, that actually there is an element of pursuing the technical business front, you know, of just numbers and making the numbers add up. But actually, if that is not aligning with your soul and your joy, then actually changes have to be made. And maybe they don't make sense on paper, but in yourself, you come alive and you feel happier. Talk us through how you mentally navigated the inevitable questions and challenges and doubts that come with, you know, actually following your heart sometimes, as opposed to just your head where you're going, well, I just need the money for the rent, you know, but you're going, but I think this is me. I think this is what I'm going to love.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to go with your gut, you know, and you explain it to people, but at the end of the day, it's not about convincing them. It's about, you know, just doing what you know you have to do. And it was not an easy year for sure. You know, the choices were hard, but for some reason, like that one wasn't. It was almost like I need to either retire from photography or do this. Those are my options because I can't keep going the way that I am going. You know, the path has ended here and there's a why, you know, it's like I have to take one way or the other. And for me, it was obvious that this was it, even though it wasn't going to be easy. It was clear.
Yes. And what was it about your business at the time that you were just like, I cannot keep going like this. This is not making me happy. What was it that prompted you then to change? Because some of the listeners might be in that position in their business right now, but they don't know that that's an indicator that you need to make changes. They might just think, oh, it's the hustle of business. It's, you know, you just have to make it work, you know, but actually to let them know if you're experiencing these type of symptoms or if you're feeling like this about your business, it's a sign that you need to make changes.
Yeah, I mean, there was probably a confluence of a number of different things. Like I'd mentioned, I had a couple of particularly difficult clients, which just were very, it was just so disheartening, you know, and I think I became a little jaded as well, just concerned that every client I was booking was going to be like them, or, you know, I almost had like PTSD from it. And so that had taken my joy out, because when you work with lovely people and, you know, they're appreciative of what you're offering, and it's just so life-giving. And I feel like I could shoot weddings, you know, every weekend for the rest of my life when I work with lovely people. But sometimes it's the opposite, you know, when you're working with people who aren't, and it just takes the joy and the love of what you're doing right out of you. So that was part of it. You know, I had a full-time employee and, you know, a lot of overhead at this point, 10 years into my business. So we were struggling. I think, you know, markets change, and I was a higher price point, and for some reason the people in my area weren't spending as much as they used to on photography. And so, you know, I was having to compete a lot, and it was scary, you know, from a financial standpoint. And, you know, God just really stripped me at that point and helped me to realize, you know, my business is the way that He has provided for me in the past. But ultimately, God is my provider, not my business. Does that make sense? So good. God has promised to provide for me. He hasn't promised to provide for me through my business. He can
Yeah,
provide
so
for me.
good.
He can provide for me through whatever means he'd like
Yeah.
to. And I need to have hope in that and
Yes.
not cling to like my business and what I want,
Yeah.
what I want my life to look like necessarily. I need
Yeah.
to keep an open hand and surrender
Yeah.
that to him. And
Amazing.
I even, looked at the worst case scenario at that point in my business. I was like, okay, worst case scenario,
Mm.
I'm a failure. I have
Oh
to shut
gosh.
down my business,
Yeah.
and I had to just kind of come to terms with this is the worst
Yes.
possible outcome that could
Yes.
happen. And I'm okay with that. Of course it's not ideal, but
Yeah.
I need to, I guess for me in my faith journey, it was a good step to, surrender that and be open-handed and allow God um, to be my leader and my God at that time to show me what he wanted and not necessarily what I wanted. So it was I was very stripped down. I was very just kind of got to that point of surrendering and letting go of my hold on what I thought that the business should look like. But from that point, he was able to recreate something, that maybe I wasn't willing to step into without being broken down to that point. So.
Oh, I think we all go through that. What I call the big squeeze. I see it like those egg timers that they used to get that with an hourglass timer. I think everybody comes to a point in their life where it's just the big squeeze where you have to just filter through what is important, what makes me happy, what doesn't make me happy. And I love that you were thinking through all the possibilities, going, there is a possibility that this is all going to come crashing down and I'm just going to be a failure. But that still wasn't as bad as keeping going as you were, because keeping going as you were just wasn't satisfying you. It wasn't fulfilling you and it wasn't making you happy at the end of the day. We're both Christians and I believe that God wants us to be happy and he's placed happiness within us and we have to follow that path. And we know instinctively inside of us what is good for us and what's not good for us and what makes us feel restful and peaceful and inspired and creative, and what just makes us feel like we're dying a little bit inside and is just sucking all of the life and joy out of us. And we have to just stay on that path of life, essentially, that one that gives us life rather than the one that slowly drains it out of us.
And I think you're right. Like, I think sometimes you have to get to the point of crisis in order to be willing to pivot, because for me, pivoting at that point was a lot of work and it was hard for me to imagine going through a rebrand and all of the things that it would take to kind of find joy again in photography. But it just had to get to that point for me to be willing to use my energy to do that,
I love that. That's such a good thought, that you have to get to a point of crisis to have the courage to pivot.
Maybe some other people might not need to, but
I think we all do. I think this is a universal human experience, to just, and especially like you said, it's hard when it's something that you've built and invested so much in. It's a bit like your baby, but you're just like, actually, the baby's outgrown the crib. This isn't working anymore. This isn't suitable anymore. It was for a time, but it's not anymore. And like you said, having the courage to be able to go, okay, let's start again, even knowing this might all just come crashing down. But for the people who may be facing that, they may be listening thinking, okay, yeah, I do identify with that. I'm not happy where I'm at. I'm gonna have to take some changes, but the changes feel almost as scary as staying where I am because there's financial risks involved, and I don't know what things are going to look like. You then had a 5 to 6 year career after that with clients who were paying you for your film work. So just give us a little message of hope that actually you can move past that point of crisis and pivot and come out into another expression of your business, which is just as fulfilling, if not more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it felt like even though it was hard to go through that change in that year, it helped me to kind of explore creatively a different part of me that was growing. Like I felt like I kind of reconnected with myself as an artist.
Interesting. Yeah.
And, if you remember early on in your career, that excitement of creating and being excited about what you're doing, like to get back to that is very fulfilling. And so
good.
I just felt like I enjoyed what I was doing again. I loved my work. I was proud of it.
Wow.
I was able to work with some lovely clients. And, it was what I needed to do. And it was very life-giving ultimately. And, my path continued from there. I started a photo booth company and continue to work, on the education side and with my associate photographers and working on a line. So, I did have a great few years after that. And again, God, has brought me to a point of pivoting, but I definitely have loved, shooting film and creating, beimages that I love more than anything else that I created, before that point in my career.
And so you've come to another point of pivot again now, which is fascinating. And I are you experiencing some of the feelings that you had before? And the same fears and questions about making such a big change, leaving photography behind and focusing on a line album design?
Somewhat, but there's some similarities in like, I just know that this is what I have to do, like there's a piece about the clarity of it. Like I know I need to do this. It's just a gut. Like I can't carry on the way that I have been. And what it's come to is, I got married 2 years ago. I have a 1-year-old. I was running 3 businesses at the time. And what I kind of realized is, as much as I'd like to, I can't do all of these things with excellence. I just can't, and there's something about like when you're single and you're an achiever, you can do so much, but I have different priorities now and, a shared purpose with my husband and his goals. So I just realized, I can't continue to do everything with excellence. And so let me simplify. And I started to really crave simplicity, I just want to focus on one thing, and what could that one thing be? And photography, I love, but, I'm getting older and I know I think we all intuitively know, like we can't do it forever. And so having something else that we can do, for me, creating another stream of income that's more scalable. It doesn't require me being out shooting and away from my family every weekend has been something that's been very fulfilling. I love that I've been able to create something that I'm proud of, that I can scale, that isn't, necessarily attached to my name and that type of thing. So even though it's like a big change, I'm at peace and I have a lot of excitement about what the future holds. And, I still get to, with Align, I still get to be in the photography industry, interacting with photographers who are some of my favorite, people to be able to be interacting with. And I get to still have an outlet of education. I get to share my experience with photographers to help them to be successful with albums and to grow their profit. And so it's a perfectly natural fit for me. And it really fulfills me in a lot of ways. And as we know, photography, once a photographer, always a photographer, I can always, go shoot and enjoy photography just for the joy of it. So,
and document your little baby Bo as well. That is amazing. And that I love the way you described that you felt peaceful. It's a big change, but you felt peaceful. And I think being able to tune into that sense of peace and being able to obey it and go where it's leading is a challenge, because we have a lot, but what about this and what about that, and actually I love that you've got that confidence, and maybe it's because of that big pivot that you had in 2014 that it's given you the confidence to know, okay, I need to be aware when things are not working anymore. My circumstances have changed. That baby doesn't fit in the crib anymore. It worked, but it doesn't work anymore. My priorities have changed. My work life has changed. And so my work has to change in line with it. Is so good. It's so good. You mentioned being single, which I know is actually a really interesting topic I'd love to talk about, because you were single for most of the time that you were photographing weddings. And I think that's something that we've not discussed on the podcast, and I think is actually a valid challenge for a lot of people who are photographing joyful people getting married, meeting the love of their life. If you're struggling with chronic singleness that feels like it's never going to end, or a series of disastrous relationships, or you're just gone through a long-term relationship breakdown, or you maybe even tragically have even lost a partner through some tragic accident or something, that's a big challenge to photograph a wedding when your own heart is breaking. Talk us through the challenges of being single photographing weddings.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that I would get married and have children young, like so many in my family have. And so I was about 25 when I went through a breakup and just kind of grieved the loss of my dream of getting married and having a family young. And I know 25 is still very young. So looking back at that, I'm like, kind of surprised that I felt that way. But for me, it was a very real grieving. Like I felt like my life has not turned out like I thought it would. Yeah. And I feel like I'm losing hope that it might, and I had to come to terms with the fact that, I may never be a wife or a mom. And I, remember praying and just saying, okay, God, if I'm not good for this, like, what am I good for? And that's around the time when I did start my photography business and found so much joy in, developing that side of myself, and continued to struggle with singleness. I think singleness has been probably my greatest struggle in my life.
Oh yeah, I can understand.
But realizing, through that God ultimately, in my faith, God ultimately does have the best for me in mind. And even though I may not understand at the time why singleness is the best thing for me, that it must be for whatever reason. And so I tried to focus on the good things in my life, and one of those good things was my business. And so I just threw myself into it. I ignored like the dating side of my life for a good decade because I just struggled with it, and I just didn't really date for all of my 30s, and I just kind of gave up, honestly, and just thought, okay, well, I'm just going to focus on the things that I do have in my life that I enjoy, my family, my friends, my business, and just, be grateful for those things. And so that's what I did. And, photographing weddings would be hard sometimes, but honestly, like, for me, I've always just been able to be happy for other people, even if they have something that I want. Like it doesn't take away from. Yeah. Does that make sense?
That's really good. It's really good.
I love married people. Like I was friends with married people. I loved being around married people. I loved being around my couples. I loved seeing them in love. And, it continued to enforce in me my desire to have a really beautiful, healthy marriage, because one of the reasons I was single is I didn't want to just be married to be married. I wanted to, only be married if it was going to make my life better. And so, there's so many people that I did weddings for that honestly, I didn't want what they had, I mean, that wasn't what I was wanting. And so it helped me just to hold out for and continue to be okay with being picky, which is
I love that.
I was perceived, I was definitely perceived
Oh
as being
yeah.
very picky. So, but I always said, I'd rather be single for the rest of my life than married and miserable.
Oh,
So,
totally.
um, so I held out, but I ended up meeting my husband when I was 41, long after,
Yeah.
I'd given up hope, and we've been married
Wow.
for 2 years, and I'm a mom now, and it's just been such a blessing to be able to experience,
Yeah.
being a wife and a mother finally.
I love that, because actually I think that your story is so encouraging, one, that there's always hope, that you got your happy ending, and actually, like you said, photographing weddings, if anything, it helped you. It was like window shopping. You're like, nope, don't want a relationship like that. No, oh yeah, that's a good relationship. Yeah, I'll have one like that. Thank you. Like that's actually helped you to solidify in your mind and give you the confidence to not settle for the wrong person, because like you said, I'm totally a believer that you're much happier single than you are with the wrong person. So that's so true. And what I like about your story is that all of those years when you were photographing, thinking, why am I not getting married? And I know that feeling. I didn't get married as late as you, but I was just turning 30 when I got married and met my husband. So in the Christian world, that's very
Yes,
old.
yes.
Most Christians get married very young. So most of my friends had all got married. They were all having children, and some of them were even starting to become teenagers. and I still was single. And I'm like you said, that the challenge of feeling like, am I picky? People are saying I'm just picky, am I? But actually all of those years, those 16 years that you were photographing and thinking, why, Lord, why am I single? You were building a platform that has enabled you now. You're newly married with a new baby, and you've got the flexibility to go, I think I'm going to leave photography and I'm going to do album design instead. And because you want to spend time with your new husband and your child. And had your husband and child 16 years ago, you would have been away at the weekends. You wouldn't have had the time with your child that you wanted. And so actually what felt like God being cruel to you and leaving you out was actually an act of great kindness, that he was preparing a life for you that you were going to love so much better than you thought you were going to. And I just think that's such an encouragement for so many of us, because we go through times in life where we just think, I think I've been forgotten. Everyone else seems to be getting their happy ending, and I don't think it's going to happen for me. I think I've been left behind. And whether you have a faith or not, whether you call it God or not, I believe that everyone is loved. If you're listening here, you're loved. And God is preparing a future for you that you're going to love, and you just have to trust and enjoy the moment and the season that you're in now. And I think your story just really gives that encouragement that what can seem limiting and frustrating and lacking at one season of your life turns out to be the most incredible gift and launch pad for the next season of your life. So I thank you so much for sharing your story, because that was a source of pain for you for a long time.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you, Sarah. I mean, hearing kind of your reflection on it and your insight, you're kind of bringing me to tears, because I've not really thought of it that way before. And so thank you for that. That's really insightful, to hear that God has turned out to bless me through this by allowing me to wait and experience this now later in life, once my business was a little bit more established. And I think you're absolutely right.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. So talk to me then about this Align album design. It's been going for a long time, but this is obviously becoming your sole focus now. What is it that you love about album design, and what is it that you can offer to photographers through this service?
Well, I just absolutely love albums. I love, the tangible product. I love seeing my clients looking through an album. I have a past client who's come back to me and said that her daughter talks about their wedding album as being her favorite book, and she always asks her parents to read it to her, and they flip through it and talk about that day. And when they get to the part where dad and mom are having their first dance, she asks if she can dance with daddy. And I mean, just the legacy that an album is in your
Yes.
in your family. It's the very best way to live with your images. And it's just my belief as a photographer that it's part of my job
Yeah.
to leave my clients with that. You
Yeah.
know, if I'm leaving them with a bunch of beautiful images, but they're sitting on a hard drive in their closet, you know, that is not serving them well. And so I just really am a believer in serving clients well through albums.
Yeah.
And I know it's a pain point for photographers. You know, we shoot, we put our heart and soul into shooting and serving our clients, but a lot of times we move on to the next wedding, you know, and the album is just this pain point for us to try and get through, or maybe we don't even want to sell albums because it's so difficult, you know. And so my mission is to help photographers succeed with albums, and I want to help them to love albums, help them to serve clients well through albums, to increase their profit. You know, you can make a minimum of $1,000 additional profit per event by selling albums, and think about how that could transform your business. So Align is a outsourcing company. We can take over, you know, the initial design, all of the revisions, which honestly is the biggest pain point, getting your clients' revisions made in a timely fashion and getting that album design wrapped up. We can print and bind your albums, or you can send those out to another album printing and binding company. And then, you know, a big part of our business is doing the education piece, where we help you to develop your workflow, to develop your sales, and just help you to serve your clients well. So yeah, that's what we, you know, strive to be in the industry, and we get to work with over 1,000 photographers worldwide, and we can serve photographers everywhere. And we have 5 designers that do all of the work, and it's been a really fun journey.
That is so good. And actually that was a question I was going to ask you. It's interesting you mentioned that actually you do focus on this with your business. What tips do you have for photographers to increase their album sales? Because like you said, a lot of photographers may not have ever really thought about how to maximize this additional profit that's there for the taking. It's on the table. You just have to engage with it. So how do you advise photographers to really maximize this potential of selling albums and therefore making additional profit?
Yeah, my biggest tip is if you want your clients to have an album, you have to be passionate about them. You know, a lot of photographers say, oh, my clients don't really want an album, but in reality, it's a reflection of the photographer's lack of passion and desire. So there's a number of ways that you can communicate your passion about albums. You know, you can share during your initial client meetings with your clients about why you want them to have an album, why it's the number one product you most want them to have. You know, share a story like what I just shared about my past client, or about your experience with your own wedding album, or your lack thereof, or your parents' album, or, you know, something just to paint a picture for them, because it really is an emotional investment, right? It's expensive, and it should be, but it needs to be something that they value. And you as the guide for them through this process are the one that can help them to realize how important this is for them and their future family. And so you can communicate the value of an album and how much you want your clients to have it through creating a space on your website where you share about albums with passion. You can communicate through the structure of your pricing. Consider putting an album in every package. You know, if you do that, you're communicating to your clients, you're going to want this. You know, and I always did that, but then I would allow my clients to take it out if they really didn't want to include it. But by default, it was there. And so 90% of my clients did end up buying one. And then another big tip is you can't sell it if you don't show it. And so
Yeah.
investing in a beautiful sample album is key, because, you know, clients will oftentimes come into the initial client meeting thinking, you know, this is how much I'm going to spend on wedding photography. Maybe they're not even thinking about an album, but if you lay a beautiful custom sample album in their lap, something that they could never create on their own, there's a good chance they're going to walk out of there including an album in their package, something that they never expected to spend money on. And that's happened to me time and time again, where, you know, the client will be like, I never expected to spend $3,000 or $4,000 on an album, but I can't live without this.
Wow,
you know? And
amazing. So
they go back and they change and reconfigure their budget because they see what they want. And, you know, we've all experienced that when we're shopping, you know, like there's something that catches our eye and all of a sudden we're reconfiguring, you know, everything in our brain and trying to figure out how we can make it work. So so that's our job as photographers, is to show them something beautiful, you know, a work of art that's really gonna excite them.
I love that. And I like that you said that the client's desire for an album often reflects the importance that the photographer is placing on it, the excitement that the photographer feels about the album. And a lot of people are trusting their photographer to guide them into what they want, because a lot of people have not thought this through before. They've never been married before, and they're not thinking 10, 20 years down the line what they're going to need. They're consumed with, you know, how much is it going to cost and who are we going to book, you know. And actually, like you said, we can take the lead as photographers to let them see the bigger picture. This is what we would advise, you know, as somebody who has experience in this area and who has known a lot of people who've walked this road before you. An album is something they really treasure, so it's something to really consider. And you've obviously seen great success in your own business, just taking that slightly different tack with people to present them with the album and make them fall in love with it, which is brilliant. And so why is it of benefit for a photographer to hire an external company to do the design for them? How does that help a photographer?
Yeah, I mean, obviously photographers can do it themselves, but what we found is we have so many clients who used to do it themselves, who maybe even enjoyed it. But what they found is they just weren't serving their clients well through the process. You know, they were taking too long to get the initial design, and then the revisions would come in and they would, you know, be off shooting a wedding, and, you know, they wouldn't be able to get back to their client. And, you know, all of a sudden, you know, they go from having this amazing experience where their clients are giving them great reviews to now the very end of the experience with the album, it's the worst part of the process, you know, and the client's frustrated and the photographer's frustrated because it's going on for 6 months, a year, 2 years, you know. And so streamlining that by bringing in another team member, which is really what we like to think
what it
of
is.
ourselves as, you know.
Interesting.
We like to be a part of photographers' team in serving their clients. And so we like people to think of us as their in-house album designer, you know, like we can come alongside you and serve your clients in this process. And so I just think, you know, it's going to make your clients happier. It's going to save you time, which makes you more money ultimately. And, you know, you'll be able to do a lot more albums as a result of outsourcing it. So ultimately, I think it's a win-win for you, your clients, and even your profit line.
That makes so much sense. That actually, I like the fact that you brought a focus to the fact that this is the final stage of interaction with you and your client. And if it's not as good as the rest of the interaction, it taints it. It taints all your hard work and everything else you've been doing with them, because they're now frustrated. And yes, it costs extra money, but you've got capacity to do more albums because you're outsourcing them. So actually, over the grand scheme of things, you're able to sell more albums, even though
and if you know anything about being an entrepreneur, it's not smart to spend your time behind your computer, you know, working on something you've already been paid for, you know. Give that to someone else to do, pay somebody else to do that, and then spend your time growing your business, working on the things that are going to make you more money. That's really the wise way to grow your business.
That is such good advice, such good advice. But I think sometimes, all entrepreneurs in general, let alone photographers, can feel like they have to be all things at all times, doing everything, and actually the recipe for
Absolutely.
burnout. And you're just up till late in the night doing things that don't really make you happy. And like you said, you're actually freeing yourself to do the things that make you happy. You gave the example of you're actually in the middle of wedding season, and then you've got people emailing with amendments to their album design, and actually it detracts your focus from the thing that you're really loving, which is photographing your clients. So that makes a lot of
Absolutely.
sense. So
Yeah.
I'd say it's such an interesting and fascinating business that you've got, and I think obviously is helping a lot of photographers already. So people who are listening that want to get in touch with you, and we'll put the link in the Facebook and on the podcast episode. But for those that are listening to the audio version, can you let people know where they can go to get in touch with you for the Align album design service?
Absolutely. Thank you. You can find us online at alignalbumdesign.com. And then we're also very active on Instagram under Align Album Design. I do Insta stories almost daily. I share a lot of tips, and you can just follow us for free album related tips if you'd like.
Brilliant. Oh, that sounds amazing. So I thoroughly recommend getting in touch with Melissa and following along, and getting the tips, and getting hooked on the idea of not doing your album designs anymore and freeing up your life to do what you love and sell more albums. So then, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing such interesting parts of your story, which I believe is just going to be such a massive encouragement to so many people that are at the start of the journey when you're concluding it, and that's such a helpful perspective, I think, to keep people going. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you for having me, Sarah. It's been so fun.
If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find more interviews, tips and inspiration in the Love Light Fine Art community on Facebook. You can also follow along with each new episode on the Love Light YouTube, podcast and Instagram. And don't forget to visit www.sarahjaneethan.co.uk/lovelight for information on training, real-life wedding workshops and online courses to develop your own fine art photography and connect with more of the clients you love.